Hi guys, welcome to another code film. So this is a freestyle code film, and in this code film, I want us to look at something. Um, we are going to enter unfamiliar waters. When I say unfamiliar waters, you're a programmer or you're a software engineer or a software developer in one line of stack. So what do I mean? Maybe you just know the Spring and Java framework, and um, you are faced with a challenge of implementing a solution, but the solution is in a different language and it has to be incorporated in the same project. So you ask yourself, how do I grasp the fundamentals of that language and you know solve the problem? Because I can't also give an excuse. That's to me. I wouldn't want to give an excuse that, oh, it's not my stack. No, I don't believe in that. Your ability to play um, around multiple stacks is a plus. You don't need to be a professional in that. You just need to be at least you need to know the basics. So it's not about how specialized in that. Yeah, you can specialize, but there's a foundation upon which you actualize to get to the top, or to maintain that speciality. So you can't leave out the foundation. So let's look at this problem statement here. I got this from Cave of Programming by John Purcell, if I'm pronouncing his name right. I'll leave more about him in the description. So this is a question I was challenged with. It says if someone tries to insert any kind of cut, the trigger should insert XXX instead and should log the attempted entry, including the animal name in the violations table, along with the date and time it occurred. Alright, so this problem statement is SQL problem. It's got to do with database programming. Now the thing is, I just know the basis of database. This is the problem statement probably the project manager has brought to me. How am I going to turn this into code? Because to be honest, that's one of the greatest challenges. You can know the language, you can learn the language, you can even have some practicals on the language, but how do I turn this into code now? That's the most challenging part in programming, from what I've realized. So this is is this a SQL problem? But mysql is a database management system that is going to be used. So how do we turn this? So now this is where some form of um, reference and cues I've come across can help to get the problem solved. The solution exists, but I just want to look at how we move from the problem to the solution, or even if we can do some reverse engineering along that. But just stick with me and let's get right into it. So first of all, let's have a screen here. Okay, so new slide. So first of all, we know that is a problem. It's a we have in software development. Let's say software development. So it's a software development or programming. Let's say software development or programming is the domain. So we know our domain, that software is our domain or our knowledge base. Then what else do we know? We know that it has to do with something with databases. So this databases, let me have, I shouldn't have. Wow. I don't know which kind of software engineering technique would have been used for such a thing. Uh, I don't know, overriding or anonymous, I'm not sure. Maybe later I'll investigate. Alright, so let's do this as how that's the digestion process. Digestion process. So we have our software development. This, we know the domain, we know the actual and I don't say entity, but we have front end and back end most of the time. If it's so we know it's databases, and then we know that we have front end or back end. So if it's not a front end problem, it has to be a back end issue. So if it's a back end issue too, then we know that it's databases. So this is not something I'll point down, but just to know why have I said databases. So at least I know my I have the domain. After the domain, I know in my domain which um I don't know the word to use here, but which area to delve down into, the front end or the back end. And it's a database, so if it's a database, then fine, we know it has something to do with the back end. Okay, then with databases too, this how do we solve this now? It can be, it has something to do with SQL, and SQL is also, what's SQL? SQL is a structured query language. It's a programming language, so that's the language you are going to use to do anything related to the databases. So SQL is, so we say, programming language for databases. No, it's SQL. All right. So that's one thing now we know, and we'll choose a database management system we want to use. So we are using mysql. So the database management system we want to use. Now the thing is, we have to have some knowledge about SQL, mysql, before we can even delve down to solving this problem. So what knowledge do we have about mysql or SQL? So if you don't have any knowledge at all, that's where you get stuck. But let's see, I don't have any knowledge at all, so how do I still solve this problem? And then this is where you have to go into documentation and reference manual. So now let's say now reference manuals and reference manual. So we decide what support, let's make rather what support in code framework are we going to use. So we'll say that first we have a reference manual. So I will read about mysql that somebody else has developed and implement the solution. We have, there could be some tutorials. We could search for exact tutorials to know how to get what we want, or it could even be videos. So tutorials, articles, or something also. Videos. Okay. So this is what we are going. This is the next step. Then after this, then we just have to do. Now we just do. So let's have our problem again. So if someone tries to insert blah 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 blah, insert I'm sorry, the trigger should insert X instead and should log the attempt in a violations table. So this is how we're going to go about it. We know it's something in programming, it has to do with databases, and we have some fundamentals in programming. So SQL programming language for databases. Then we're going to use the mysql database, and we know we have reference manual, tutorials, articles, and videos. And the next thing is to do. So now we are going, now we move online. So the next step we are going to do so online search. We are going to do our online search, looking at our problem statement. It could be two ways of online search. Either you are doing a generic search, or you're going straight to the problem. That's a specialization search. Alright. So let me pull up mine. We'll definitely write this code. You have to always not stress, but push yourself to get something to work, because no job title requires you to be a professional person in it. You just have to know how to get the job done. Yeah, that's what's really important. Okay, so now let's go straight to. So these are steps analyze and do. So now let's choose the search we want to do. We could do a generic search or a specialized search. Because I know a little bit about mysql, I have some knowledge about mysql, I'll go straight to a specialized search. But if you have no knowledge at all, how do you move to a specialized search? So yeah, maybe we want to do a generic search first. So let's do our generic search first. So first, we know SQL is a programming language, SQL. So and we are going to use mysql. So let's just do mysql. But mysql is a database management system. So let's just go with SQL. So let's go with SQL. Oh, then we connect to the internet. So SQL. So all this you are doing research, all this is research for relational databases. We have SQL introduction, that's supporting framework tutorials. We have SQL tutorials. So which article are you going to choose to implement your solution? But we need to know, you need to have some basics first of SQL. Let's just go straight. Let's look at this one. And MySQL is a database management system. And also how you align yourself, how you align your thoughts around MySQL. So you are new here, you don't know what to search for, but you know that this is MySQL that can do your work for you. So what can SQL do? This one gives you what SQL does. So even with the documentation, are you using, even with the tutorial, are we using the right tutorial? Is it aligned towards what we want? So this one just gives you how to just start. It doesn't really list the flavors or features or the the encode the specification or the specs of SQL. You buy an iPhone or you buy an Android phone, the specification has this camera, this. So if you want anything to do, you just go straight to the camera. But looking at this documentation is not something that we may want to use now, because it's just giving us tutorials how to do type, but we don't even have knowledge about what we want to do. So how do we type? We don't even know what we're searching for. So it's like we're not comfortable with this. Then we look for another one. So let's try this one. Okay, so this one too doesn't really give us our flavors. Then we'll say fine, this is what we're going to do. We can boil down straight. We can go straight to, let's even check Wikipedia and see, get what we want. What are we searching for? We are searching for features or functionalities that will help us to do our work right away. Not something that will, it should help us to do it right away, but there should be a guiding way of doing it, not just I stood up and I just did anything. A data query language, data definition language, data control language, data manipulation language. This is quite broad. Yeah, we're looking for something like this. SQL language is subdivided into several languages, including clauses, expressions, predicates, queries, statements. We are searching for something of this kind. So the syntax, and also is there any other thing? So at least we've gathered some knowledge on what we want to do here. We're looking for statements, queries, predicates, expressions, clauses. So we go back again, and because we're using MySQL, we want to also search around MySQL's reference manual. just to gain some knowledge. So all this while we're just gaining knowledge, nothing fancy. So MySQL reference manual, MySQL workbench, MySQL server. We're using the server, so I'm using MySQL 8.0. That's what I'm using here. So this one is the reference manual. It documents MySQL through 8.0. Yeah, so we may want to start from here and probably scan through something like language structure. How does the language structure works? Or probably could even this is more of a generic search. You are just trying to search for the right cue that will lead you to start doing something. So first you may just want to be abreast with what you are seeing here. It looks like it's keeping quite long. You don't want to waste so much time. So another thing you could just do is just start searching for something like trigger. That trigger should be insert XSS or whatever. So triggers, SQL. Let's see. Is there an example? Um, you want something with an example, a tutorial? Okay, so the trigger should insert X. It should log the attempted entry. So this is syntax based, but even with the MySQL documentation, you could still search for triggers to see what to know where it falls under the MySQL framework. So let's trigger syntax and examples. So where is this information coming from? It's coming from stored objects. So this is one word, stored object. So this is coming from a stored object, and then trigger syntax and example. Create a trigger, drop a trigger. So you create a table and we create a trigger to the table and insert on account. Get it? So we are getting somewhere now. So we could have gone with this way, but this one is quite open. When I say open, you don't really get the gist you want. It's going to be more reading. You keep searching, you get what you want. But when you come to the MySQL reference and you just type trigger, you just narrow down straight to what you want. So this is a syntax, an example. Here's a simple example that associates a trigger with what? A table. To activate for insert operation, the trigger acts as an accumulator, summing the values inserted on one of the columns of the table. So we have our basic syntax here. You can just copy. Yes, you can copy the syntax and work with it straight away. So at least you know where this is coming from. This is stored procedure. That's one thing you should know. So anything that has to do with stored procedures, stored objects, you know where to start from. Okay, so create trigger. Let's can narrow down. Create trigger statement. Can create for a definer. That's for a user. Wow. And this statement creates a new trigger. The trigger requires trigger privileges for the table associated with it. It can go on and on and on. Cascaded foreign key sessions do not activate triggers. It can go on and on and on and on and on and on. So you just want some examples, but you can also look at the reference as well. You can also have this in mind just in case of anything. Definer and stuff, you learn it later on. That has to do with user rules on particular procedures and tables, a whole lot of stuff. These things you can pick them up later on when you are going through the documentation. Yeah, so this is for those who have no knowledge at all about SQL or MySQL. Okay, no knowledge at all. That's how we are going about this. Okay, so we've seen what we want. Now let's go straight to let's copy this. Let's copy something of this sort and just get started. So it says if someone tries to insert any kind of cat, the trigger should insert XXX instead. So first things first, it says triggers have to be associated with what? A table. Associate a trigger with a table. So we have to have a table. So first of all, we have to create a table for what? Cat. So let's go straight. Now next thing is, so this is our solution. So we've seen what triggers are about. Trigger says we need creation of tables. Next one, we need creation of triggers. So we are getting somewhere. So first thing is we are going to create a table for our problem. So if someone tries to insert any kind of cat, the trigger should insert XXX instead. And so let's first create our table. So creation of tables. So how do we create a table now? So now that's what you just search how to create a table in mysql. You can just get Google search how to create a table. So you can pick any for this. From here on, you can just pick anything and start going through. So create table, table name. To create table statement used to create a new table in database. If you want to be more specific, you can go and say, okay, what is a table? Table and database. What's the relationships between a table and a database? So a table is a collection of related data held in a table format within what? A database. So a table is like, that's what holds information in a database. So that's why we need a table. So this is how we create a table. The syntax: give the table a name, and then columns, column. You may not know what columns mean, but hey, you don't need to know everything to do something. You just need to know that if you want to create a table, you have to have columns. Probably later on you can still Google and see columns and tables and databases, and it goes further. So in a relational database, a column is a set. Let's go dive straight into Wikipedia. In a relational database, because it's a kind of database that is relational, a column is a set of data values of a particular type. One value for each row for the database is a set of data values of a particular type. One value for each row of the database. So can we have an example? Can we see how a column looks like? Do we have an example of what a column should look like? Is there anything that should lead us to see how columns look like? That's being investigative. Or so this is a column. So it says you should only have one data value. So a relational database system contains one or more objects called tables. The data information for the database are stored in these tables. Tables are uniquely identified by their names and are comprised of columns and rows. Columns contain the column name, data type, and other attributes for the column. Rows contain the records of data for the columns. So columns contain the column name, data type, and any other attributes. And then the data information are stored in tables. So tables is the mother. Columns helps to place certain things under the mother, and then the row is the actual value or the records of data for the column. It's okay, we've had enough. So you can easily also copy the syntax. Okay, you can copy something that works. So you have to have a data type. That's where you have to have some basis of uh, computer programming. So if you don't know the basis of some computer programming, how are you going to start? So first things first, you should have some basics of computer programming. Let's log into this one right now. That's the solution out there. So let's first of all create our table. We'll create a table. Next one, we have to create a trigger to so create table, then create trigger. So let's copy the syntax for create a trigger as well. Let's go from the main documentation. Let's copy something of this sort. So create a trigger. So we are gradually getting some. We've created our tables, we've created our trigger. So the trigger should insert XSS. So someone tries to insert any kind of cat. So any kind of cat. So you can name our table a cat. It's a cat table. The trigger should insert XSS. So first of all, let's name out cat. How do we know that it has to be this way? Because we've seen the syntax for creating a table. The table name is cat, and then we know that tables need columns because it needs columns because columns is how we are going to associate, contain the column name, data type, and other attributes for the column. So columns, these tables are uniquely identified by their names and are comprised of columns and rows. So columns contain the column name. That's the name. So what name will we want to even give to this? So say, how do you know that we're changing this from this? So these are guiding syntax. So first of all, column, and so it has to have a name, the name, data type, and other attributes. So let's give this one a name as, so name this as name, and data type, you have to have some programming language that data type, we want it to be a string. We are storing something like cat. Let's see, tiger is a cat, lion is a cat, and house cats. So all these are strings. So how do we find a string equivalent in databases? So data types and references. So each column in a database is required to have a name and a data type. An SQL developer must decide what type of data that will be stored in each column when creating a table. The data type is the guideline for SQL to understand the type of whatever. So a variable length string, the size parameter specifies the column length. So you want something of string. So it has to be varchar. So we use varchar. And then the length, let's just do 50. And we don't need all this now. Okay, so we are getting somewhere, and let's also create our trigger. So if someone tries to insert anything in any kind of card, the trigger should insert XS6. So let's name our trigger as well. We've created our table, we have our trigger here. So let's see, how do we go about that? Is there any documentation for that as well? So here's an example. The name is this, that is associated with the account table. So first, the trigger name, let's call this one before before, let's give it a nice name, something that tells you what a trigger is supposed to do. So if someone may ask, even what is a trigger? A trigger acts as an accumulator, summing the values inserted into one of the, that's for this example. But so the first thing to will be what's the trigger is equal. So down to polish. It's a special type of stored procedure that automatically runs when an event occurs in the database server. A special type of stored procedure, it automatically runs when an event occurs. So when the insertion is occurring, this is what we want it to do. So we'll give it a nice name, before cat insert. So now let's go back. We've given it the name. Let's go back to our documentation. So the keyword before indicates the trigger action time. In this case, the trigger the trigger activates before each row is inserted into the table. The other permitted keyword is after. So before you insert, so create trigger before cut, then it says before you insert onto this table. So we do the same thing before that event. So you want this event to occur before you insert on the cut table, our cut table. Before you insert on our cut table, what do you want us to do? Before you insert on our cut table, for each row set, that's the syntax. The syntax for triggers is as such. Even from here, you create the trigger, the name, before, after, insert. So you can even copy this one as well. Let's pick the one from the documentation. Okay, so this for trigger. Then we have given it the name for each row. This is what so that's what we want to do. The question, sorry. The question says that someone tries to insert any kind of card, the trigger should insert XSX instead. If you try to insert any kind of card, that's as and when it's occurring, it should log the attempted entries as and when you are trying to insert for any kind of card. So it's something that will go on and on and on. So you can even boil down to the documentation and try and understand the for each row. So it even breaks down the so this statement creates a new trigger. The trigger is a named database that's associated with the table that activates when a particular event occurs. Trigger name exists in the schema namespace. We won't go into that. Create a trigger requires trigger privileges. We won't go into that. Basic, we won't go into that. So there's a counter trigger event. It's an insert event. For each row is being provided by SQL. So they know why they are providing. That's the structure of the syntax. So you have to just stick with it. So you still have to have for each row here. So it says for each row set. Then you come down. What do you want to do now? This is what we want to do. So before you cut insert, our logic says that our problem says that the trigger should insert XSSS. So if someone tries to insert this kind of any kind of cut, the trigger should insert. So we are going to perform an insertion also here. So you want to insert. So how do you ask yourself, how do you insert SQL? That's also another way of searching. And later you want to log the attempted entry, including the animal name, in a violations table. So you also want to store what you're trying to insert into a violations table. So how do you solve it now? Let's look at what some people have done already. So first things first is let's look at the first example we had. Let's understand the example. So this example says that for each row set, at sum and at sum should be equal to the new amount. What does this mean? So the trigger acts as an accumulator, summing the values inserted into one of the columns of the table. So before you insert the sum. It says for each row set, at sum is equal to at sum plus the new account set. So let's look at the example here. Set at sum is equal to 0. You can also copy the same thing because you just copy the code. Something that you just have to copy. And it says the statement following and search. You have to search specifically. The statement following for each row defines the trigger body. That is the statement to execute each time the trigger activates, which occurs once for each row affected by the triggering event. In the example, the trigger body is a simple set that accumulates into a user variable the values inserted into the account amount row. The statement refers to the column as new amount, which means the value of the amount column to be inserted into the new row. What was he saying? I don't understand. What he's trying to say is that if you look into this example, the new amount, you have an amount table already, but before you insert into this account amount, don't just give me the new amount. Give me the new amount as a result of the accumulation. So it is going to be a sum I already had plus what? The new amount. So if I had 50 Ghana cedis and then I knew the previous amount, the new amount shouldn't just be 50 cedis. It should be a sum of that plus the new amount. I hope you get it now. Yeah. So that's the same thing we are going to do here. So here too, we are going to say that this saying that if someone tries to insert any kind of cut, the trigger should insert XSX instead. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to insert XSX instead? So we can have a variable. We can first things have a variable to hold our value. So we want to hold the value the person is going to insert, and then when he enters that value, we will change, we will save it, and then later we will change, we will switch to the XSX. So looking at what was done already here, you can also go search for trigger examples. What are some of the trigger examples you have here? SQL trigger to problem statement. Let's look at this one too. Giving a student report database in which student marks assessments recorded. In such schema, create a trigger so that the total and average of specified marks is automatically inserted whenever a record is inserted. So create a trigger so that the total and average of specified marks is automatically done whenever a record is inserted. Okay, so they've been able to come up with their own code. So this for each row, set the student.total to student.subject1 plus that, and student per is equal to student.total. That's one way that they've solved this problem. They've solved their own problem. So we can see some sets going here, and set is how to set the variable. So our question is, what do you want to set before you set on this student for each row? Blah, 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 blah. So that's one way. Is there any other thing else we can gather to start something? You can still read more. Let's see. The new will be what you want to insert, and then if there's a new, can there be an old? It's how coincidence you can. So you can just skim through the code, just see what people to have done. Or you can just take the risk and just type. Okay, I'm seeing something else. In an insert trigger, only new column can be used. There is no old row. So only new can be used. There is no old row. In a delete trigger, only old column can be used. There is no new row. In an update trigger, you can use old to reference the old one and new. So it's an insertion, only new column words can be used. So because we are seeing them use old and new, and new is referring to what you want to do. And new says that, and from our problem statement, new just says the trigger should insert XSS instead and should log the attempted entry, including the animal name, in a violations table, along with the date and time is okay. So we'll set new dot, and new here referring to new dot name. So if someone tries to insert any kind of cat, the trigger should insert XSX instead. So how do you know that you are inserting any kind of cat? That's the thing. So how do I know I'm inserting any kind of cat? So we have to check that one too. So let's give this one a cat name. Set cat name to an empty string for now. And say if you try to insert any kind of cat name, so we have to do some checks here. Here's a checks. So checks. If someone tries to insert any kind of cat, so that we have to do some checks. How do we check that? How do we check? So now you have to go back to your documentation and see how to do a check. So come back and can Google generically and how to perform checks in SQL. If there's something like that, it may be too broad, but with the basics of programming language we have, you may not even need to go this way. Probably you can say that checks, it has to do with something control flow, is control flow if else something of that sort because you know a little bit about programming, so you wouldn't want to stress your life when you know a little bit about programming because you have the fundamentals. If you didn't have the fundamentals at all, then I don't know how you search for that. Let me try something and see. SQL, maybe you want to start with SQL and say check. I don't know. Let's check again. Let's look at the program statement. Before someone tries to insert any kind of cat, the trigger should insert XSX. So you can do something like SQL basics structure. So the basic structure. Let's see if we get something here. We're looking for something more realistic. Something more of a structure. It shows you all the how to refer to the documentation. Not necessarily, but how. Okay, so this one looks TTL command, TMD command, and DCL command. So we have the data definition language, includes changes to the structure of a table like creation. We have the data manipulation language used for manipulating the data. We have the transactional control, and we have the data control, data query. Is that all? It's creating a database. So what will control fall under? That's the question now. So how to Google it's gonna be okay, so let's try this rather. Let's do SQL. Let's say SQL course. We're not going to learn the course, but we are searching for something to guide us. We know what we are searching for in our minds, but we don't know where to find it. So you wouldn't want to pick a quick course and just start. You don't know that you don't know what you're searching for, so you want to have a different approach. You also don't want it. Let's look at the tutorials then. Let's look at the tutorials. So let's see. We've been there before. So this is all for database. This scaffolding or this arrangement is not going to help us because we don't even know what this falls under. It's not the best way of querying for this. So you may want to SQL book. It's a book too much. We don't want to learn SQL. We just want to grab something and go. Some of these books too you have to buy. We don't want to learn SQL. We're looking for something, so we have to find that thing that we know that will help us to solve this problem. Let's see. It just shows you the commands. It doesn't just this and that and that. You spend so much time searching for what you want, and it's not the best. Time is money. If you lose time, you're losing money. So SQL course to let's see SQL course. This insertion, it doesn't give us what we also want here. So let's go back to our documentation again and see if we can intuitively search for what we want, because we're looking for something around checks. checks, database, functions. Is it a statement, SQL statement? Okay, let's look at SQL statements. Create trigger came from there. Data manipulation statement, application statement, compound statement. Is it you are not looking for data manipulation statement? Don't manipulate the data. Let's look at language structure. Expressions. It's not around expressions either. So what do we do now? We can't seem to find what we want in our documentation. We're looking for, so we know it has something to do with control. So we look at, let's say you want to control something, so control SQL, and you mean control and SQL, or control and SQL. Okay, so you're seeing control statement, and you know it's programming. Because it's programming, you know that control statements, you have statements. So let's see, control statements. Okay, SQL control statement. Good. I think this is a this is a good reference or good documentation that I've seen so far. So SQL control statements. What kind of statements we have? So yeah, this will be one good documentation. So now we have SQL control statement. So if, let's look at the if. So if such condition, then SQL procedure statement. Then label is an example. Which one starts with an example? Great. So if this, you just copy everything. Don't worry, you can copy everything. So now let's delete what we don't need. Someone asks, how do you know that this is what we need or this is not what we need? Well, you know, some basis of programming. If so, we start. So we are going to say that if someone tries to insert any kind of cat, the trigger should insert XSX. So we have to check what kind of cat is he even inserting. So if now how do we know, how do we get the cat name? Because we don't know the cat is trying to insert. Is there a way of referring to the old cat name so that we can use the old cat name and check? You see, that's the thinking. So we'll go back to our documentation. So first of all, we have our control here now. We're able to bring our control statements here, and here we want to do some checks that if this, then trigger should insert this. So we know that here too we have to do some insertion. So we go and see how do we even insert it. So if statement, so how to insert. So we say insert SQL, and you can pick this one. Just copy an example. Always copy an example first. You can look for an example and just copy. This is for those of you that don't know anything about SQL. Let's even pick the one from here. Let's copy an example. And first, before you copy, you have to know what you're inserting. Insert into table name, column 1, column 2, column 3. So you have two basic syntax of insert. You may not, is used to, so what does insert do? Is used to add new rows of data to the table. That's what we need to know. So we insert. So insert into what? And log that data into include in a violations table. So we also have to create a violations table. So let's create that. seen how to create a table already. We've done that already. We've created our cat. So let's create a new table called create table violation. Someone said that this was written in caps, this is written in small letters. Does it affect anything? So probably you might want to search again around that to find if that worries SQL. But sometimes to just write in the code just to see the error response you get helps a lot. It's not everything that you know straight. You have to sometimes just test and see. Just look at the what did I get from the feedback. You are still working. It's not like you're not working. You are working. You are getting results, but you want to be sure. So, or you can say, you can Google like SQL case sensitive statement, something of that sort. Google. Um, it's too generic, so you want to say insert statement or create table, because you saw it from create table case sensitive MySQL. So let's see, let's identify case sensitivity. It's not this. Okay, so let me we want to look at this. Wow, this is becoming very technical. So it seems it depends. I think yeah, so you see, although databases they are not case sensitive on some platform, as a good platform, you should not refer to them using different cases within the subquery. So column names index are not case sensitive on any platform. Yeah, so it's best you, I think it's not case sensitive, alright, but it can be changed. That's the table names. So example is the table names, but I'm not looking for the statement itself. So this is for the names, but our table names case sensitive. So so you can ask me as well, what's the difference between create table, or create table, something of that sort. Let's see if we get something out of that. Now better still go to the documentation and SQL statements, data definition. Let's pick create table and see. It's all written in capital letters. So let's see what you see here. Yeah, this one I'm not really getting it, but I'll just try it and see. But I don't think, because if it was an issue, then you just go ahead and get a response from the database. So violation. So let's try our best to make all create table violations. So violations wants to have what kind of data type? The structure of it has to have a data type. So the data type for violations is going to be, first of all, the name of the cat. So animal name, and it's going to be of var, let's say 50. We also want to have what again? Animal name in violations table along with the date and time. So we also want to have a date and time should be two separate. So date violated, we search for the data type of that, then look for time violated. So let's go and search for data types. So date and time data types. So we'll use date because we want the date first. This one becomes more cryptic, so I just go straight and look for an example and see how it was being used. Okay, just move to it. So let's just search. Sometimes it's too cryptic. Date SQL. Look for an example. So to be in this format, 3 storage units. Just go straight and look for an example and move on. Don't waste too much time on some things. You just have to move on. Look for an example how it's being used and move on. It's SQL. SQL is the language, but some companies have their own flavors. Some do mysql, some do T. I know mysql is a database management system, but there's something called tsql. It's from Microsoft, and some underlining things will not change. It's definite. It applies to SQL servers, so it won't really affect it as much. So you can use date, and then how you want to see an example. That's every time you always want to see an example. You have an example of how it was being used. So date, yeah. So it will be in this format. The format that it will even be in. The documentation even says the format, how to be look like the default value. So it's going to be look like something of the sort, which is the year, the month, and the day. Let's be sure. So year first, month, and day. So that's the element range or how it's going to be grouped. So yeah, so you've seen it for yourself. The default value also says it. So you use date, so use the date here. Now let's check for time as well. See, this is quite stressful because you don't know the language very well and you're trying your best to do a generic search, but you know some basis of programming. So time. So let's do something on this one. So it has a default value. So let's do time. Okay, let's read more. Time equal. With this, you want to go with the documentation because time type. Is there a default value? Okay, so let's work with time now. So we know it is time. Okay, so we've created our table now. So let's go back now. So insert X instead and should log the attempted entry, including the animal name in the violations table. So insert into insert into violation. So that's the name of the table. How do we know this? As usual, documentation. So insert into violations, the structure, the syntax, insert into violations. Oh, I didn't have the primary key for any of my objects, which is wrong. This I know this. That's what I'm saying. But if you didn't know this, probably you'd have thought of it later on. That ID has where there's some ID int primary key auto increment. Yeah, let's do the same. Don't worry about this. This is something that you grasp later on. So insert into, we don't need the ID, just need to insert into violation. What are we inserting into violations? What was committed? Insert into violations the animal name and the time, date and time. So insert into animal name, that's the column, date, date violated, time violated. And then what values are we going to insert into it? Okay, so the value we are going to insert into it now has to be what the user was trying to insert during that event. So we have to be able to get the the name, which is, so name if name, yeah, so it's going to be name. Now someone asks, how do I know I'm supposed to use name? See, let's look at something here. You have to spend time looking through the documentation to find out what you want. So now let's ask ourselves, is it going to be a new amount or not? Let's check the documentation and read something about new. So this statement refers to the column as new amount, which means the value of the amount column to be inserted into the new row. So in an insert trigger, only new column name can be used. There is no old row. That's the new row can be used. Okay, so this is what we do now. So we have understood it. So if we are trying to insert something new, which is our name, if the new dot name, that's what we are going to insert. Someone tries to insert any kind of cat. Now the thing is that, how do you know the kind of cat? So we want to search that. So we are entering cats. What we are doing is that we are entering something like tiger, entering something like lion. So how do we check this kind of pattern that we are inserting any kind of cat? If we try to, because there's a cat, that means there's a defined cat. That means we have a defined cat. In other words, there's a defined cat. So if then the defined cat is maybe big cat. Big cat is the defined cat. But we have different, someone is trying to come up with tiger, lion, house cat. All these are failures. So how do we check strings, two separate strings in SQL? So we can search like that. How to, are we comparing, are we checking? So let's see how to compare strings in SQL. Okay, so we have like or this, that's good. So so you can start, you can even start from that. You can start, this can be your first entry point. Use this or like to compare strings in SQL. So that's what's the difference. Like and the equality operator have different purposes. They don't do the same thing. It's much faster. Like can interpret raw cards, so that can even be our first point of search. But someone said I don't like that approach. I don't want to be stack overflowing. What do I do according to method or procedure? Fine, that one is there. So you come to your documentation. We're all different, SQL statements. And let's see, let's search how to search like this is quite broad. Maybe this documentation functions and operators. Maybe you want to start from someone like functions and operators. You don't know why, but maybe that's where your intuition may want to start from, operators. Because maybe you have programming experience. If you have programming experience, then you know that you are doing a comparison. And comparison are operators. So comparison, yeah, we are doing a comparison. So comparison, we have like, so like is here again. So you want to start with that because you've seen it somewhere else. So like performs match on per character basis. So this is good. This is good. So now let's see how to use like. So like SQL example. So this is what we want. See, if you are trying to set any kind of cat, so if you are trying to set any kind, the trigger should set instead and should log the attendant. Any kind of cat. So if you are trying to set any kind of cat, so then we have a defined cat. So we are trying to set any kind, so we find any values that have in any position. So we have a cat. This is cat. If you are trying to insert any kind of cat, house cat, bush cat, rat cat, violation. So we're going to use the new name is like, call it this procedure. It's like, so if the new name is like this, then what do we want to do? Set the cat name to XSX. The trigger should insert XSS instead and should log the attempted entry. So first of all, insert this instead and log the attempted entry. So first of all, let's set cat name to XSX. So we're assigning a variable here. This programming to XSX and log the attempted entry. So we've done that now. So set this to XSX and we'll log the attempted entry. So our attempted entry is going to be values. We're going to insert the new name. We didn't save new name in a variable. So let's save this as set old name as this. And say that if the new name is like this, so let this be equal to new name. So if old name, with the old name or insert name, let's do insert name. If insert name, so if insert name is like that, then set the cat name to XSS, insert into violation. So the trigger should insert XSS instead and should log the attempted entry. The trigger should insert XSS instead and should log the attempted entry, including a name in the violations table. So what will go into our violations table is the insert name. What will go into our violations table will be the insert name. Insert name. Am I still having squiggly lines? Because I haven't yet closed my trigger, sorry. So insert the insert name. You set the cat name to XSS. Then we'll log what you're trying to this, what you're trying to violate, the name you're trying to violate, then the date and time. So how do we now call date and time? No one is there. You can use current date and current time. So how do we call? So current date, current time. Alright, I think we are almost done. Then let's close our trigger. Then what about the last part? Let's see it. So the trigger should insert XSX instead. So now we are trying to insert into our cat table. So also here we also have to have another insertion here. So we have two insertions, one for our violations, one for our cat. So you insert into cat. And this time around we are not going to insert cat name. And just name and cat. The table, insert into a table. One which we've seen a cat. So just insert the name. So insert this one rather and set the cat into this and what again, and should log the same at the same time to come and log into this. So it's all happening at the same time. So yeah, now let's see why we're having this quickly lines. Trigger, is this a syntax for trigger? Let's go and look for an example, trigger example. The one we having end of file. There's another way to, you could actually just run the code and see what you get. The syntax has been defined alright, but okay, remember trigger is a type of stored procedure. So let's go back to our stored objects. Maybe let's see if stored procedure has a way of going around such things, store programs using triggers. This one is being executed in the shell, so it's not going to be alright. Begin and end. Okay, so So we are executing multiple statements. So by searching through our documentation, this was a single statement. What if you have multiple statements? So and they are saying something about delimiter and begin and end. So you just go with it, stick with it, copy what you have here, begin and end. So you have to have a beginning and an end. I think that's where the error is also coming from, that there is no end of file. End is not at a valid position. So we have to have begin first. You have to have an end. And we are seeing some delimiter. We'll go into that later on, but just first of all, as much as you just copy what they are saying. So the delimiter, delimiter will start the delimiter from here. Delimiter will end here. Okay, our error is gone now. Okay, so we are good to test our code and see. So what we want to see? What we want to see is that if it's a violation, the particular cat should enter the violation table, and the XSS should be in the main cat table. So let's create our tables then. Why is this giving me squiggly lines? Oh, okay, because of something. I have to find a way within a block comment. mysql. Okay. How do I know this? Well, if you search, I'm sure if you search online too, you know that create table example. Let's see an example. Yeah, so per the new number of instances. So if you are the last one, you wouldn't have this, so it's justified. Yeah. Okay, then so let's save this now. Execute this. Let's see the response we have from our server. Wow. Oh, violations already exist. So let's drop that violations. So if already this is another, don't worry about this, but you could easily search for this and see. I should just change. Okay, let me just change the name. So let's see my violations, because it would be like I'm being some way with my representation of concept. Probably I'm trying to say I know it already, that's why, but it's not everything that you know. You have to. Now cat already exists, so cat already exists, fine. Then violation doesn't exist, so we have to create this one. Alright, sure. Now let's create our trigger, because we are not using the shell, and we've created our trigger now. Let's query. Yeah, so it has been done, but this is how to solve the problem. So the problem has been solved. So that's the question. Our CodeFilms on also how to demystify or break down or dissect or digest the problem. We've been able to do that now. Any other thing else is now I know SQL. That's why I'm able to Google what I need, because I know SQL already. So I know where to find what I want. So there's no cat name inside here, and there's no violations also as well. My violations. Yeah, there's nothing here at all. So that's one thing too. So probably you could ask yourself, if you wanted to go further, you could ask yourself, how do I now search How do I find data in my table? That's one good way because you've done some small learning. How to find data in my SQL table. So select how to get the current. Okay, time also how to find data. Sorry, have you finding? So how can I retrieve? So yeah, no retrieve. So how can I retrieve? So select and then the column name, or select stars used to retrieve all columns and then the name. So that one is justified. Just need to know how to Google. So we've done that already. Now how do you call? You have a trigger. So how do you? So the next question you can ask Google to is how do I trigger? How do I trigger? I trigger SQL. So let's look at, I think we saw some examples. Know that when you are searching, you find the examples, just leave them as it is. Be able to find a way. So okay, remember you can the trigger only gets called when you are doing what? Let's understand the problem again. The trigger only gets, you have to know what a trigger does. It only gets yes, so the trigger will only be called when it's being associated with the table, when that operation is being done on the table. So the trigger has been created already. Have we created our trigger? So let's see. Let's create the trigger. When I say create the trigger, in other words, let's have our trigger. The same way we executed the query statement, let's execute the trigger as well. And we'll start from this delimiter to this. So then someone will ask, how do I know that? So let's see trigger basics. Let's see if there's something on the internet to support that. Trigger basics. Don't watch videos as much as possible. Don't watch videos. Always try to read. Videos can slow you down. So even this one even gives you the beginning and end and everything. Create a table. It created a trigger for you. So it's even using old and new. So we'll test and see. If it doesn't work, then fine. We'll come and see how to use old and new, because the documentation made something about using old and when not to use old. So here's the delimiter stuff. Yeah, so yeah, any other thing you have to spend more time to probably see how it can be done, but as it is now, it's okay. Don't worry too much about how do I do this. If it requires that you'll be able to do it, like yeah, you'll be able to do it. So now let's insert into our database. Insert into cat name values and lion. So lion is a violation. So let's select from cat. Lion went through. That means our violation is not working. Okay, so let's find where the problem is now. Was our trigger executed? That's the thing. Getting a response. Okay. I think the table name was wrong. Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to find out why it says the set is not working. Because you can also search for the error. It says error code 1064. I don't know. Let me change this and see. Still. Okay, so let's set something around setting variables and triggers. You have to declare them. Oh, okay. They haven't been declared. Oh, sorry. So let's declare our variables. Variable declarations. Okay, sorry. How do you set what you don't what you haven't declared? So let's run it again. I'm sure the trigger will exist, so probably we'll have to remove the trigger. Still again. I thought this would be one of the least of the problem, but I still have an errors. So let's remove the trigger. So to remove a trigger is drop trigger. Is it drop procedure? It's a special type of procedure. So for casting insets. Oh, does not exist, so it will be a trigger. Trigger doesn't exist, so it hasn't been created at all. Just have an error in mysql syntax. Why could this error be? Alright, so I think we how do you even declare this variable? Let's check that one first. So declare multiple SQL variables. I put this earlier on. So if you want to do that, it has to be declared then as. There's no as in our syntax, so there's a syntax error. As. Let's run this again. Is it even running at all? Let me. Okay. Let's see. I'm not seeing anything. Okay, let's run. I don't know that. Let's just go ahead and. So there's nothing now violation stable. The trigger being created. Let me paste this somewhere. Let's copy it again. Still, there's a syntax error. Oh. But it's good. The more I think when you encounter more errors, you get to learn more about the language. So it's a good thing. You find out where this problem is coming from: local variable and global variable. We're not having the at sign. I had to start using that in C. Even the setting to resetting is the set syntax right. Okay. Oh, wow. I got that rid of that because I looked at the documentation and realized that there was nothing similar to that. So just knew that would be the solution, the ultimate solution. Still, wow. Hmm. Oh, okay, okay. Then then so control flow. Let's give it some time and see. I think we finally solved it. I just want to wait for a while then. Run this too as well. But this should do. I think for each row, for each row, for each row set or for each row, the syntax for each row set. So for each row, that was a single. It's not executing. Let's see how to remove the trigger. Trigger does not exist. Okay, so now let's create. It's not. So I'm just testing that I can do some query here. Still, it's not running. Oh, this is a serious issue. Okay, I know we can do this, but let's just. That means the trigger has been created successfully. Is that it's always trying to see? I'm not receiving. It's getting so frustrating. Hmm. Okay, let's see if this statement will work itself. Where is this coming from? Why are you creating table and evaluation? I think it's from the workbench. You have to. Comments from the last beginning. The trigger is not being created. Alright, guys. So now we're gonna finish our video. It's been through a lot of phases, we've said a lot. Alright, so now let's solve the error that we've encountered. Oh, 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 oh. First of all, let's run our trigger. Let's execute the trigger. Let's insert again. I don't know why this time this error we're having was really a problem. And now the error seems to have just disappeared. Okay, it's good to have the. Okay, now let's just continue and see what it looks like this time around. Let's try using cat again. House cat. Okay, yeah, the error is this. Now you see, when we try inserting house cat, because it's following the pattern of like cat, you do realize that we get this update issue because we are doing two insertions in one. The trigger is supposed to do the insertion, but it seems we are also inserting, even though an insertion is occurring. An insertion is occurring when we are also calling the trigger, which is wrong. So someone saying, I don't know how am I going to solve this. Then the question now has to do with documentation. Documentation. Go and look at the documentation. You definitely find one or two examples how they set their new amount, because you can't set the old value for insert trigger. You have to go with the new value. So you have to go with the new amount. So this is how they did their own set new amount, because the trigger is going to do that work when you are doing the insertion. That's before insert. So you can't have another insert here. So we're rather going to do set cat name. Is it cat name that we set new dot cat name to xxx. Alright, so let's drop our trigger. let's truncate all our tables. So let's execute our trigger again. Okay, let's query. There's nothing here. Let's query. Now let's insert house cat. Alright, so house cat is a type of cat. It shouldn't go into our cat table, it should go into our violation. So it comes into our cat table as XSX and our violations as house cat. Isn't this so sweet? Now let's try this too. Let's try lion. Lion won't go into violations, but it goes into um, the main cat table because it's a kind of cat, but it's not following the pattern. So there's no what violation. Or if you like, we could just do another random one, insert into cat name, the values of catfish. Let's insert catfish, and let's execute that. You do realize that catfish is a violation, hence we should do find catfish in our violations table. So catfish, the time and the date. Alright, so that's it for this code field. Thank you for sticking through, and subscribe, like, comment.